Why do you look at me with those eyes?
Because you are perfect. I can't get my eyes off you.
There is a particular kind of tension that lives between two people who are paying careful attention to each other and pretending not to. It has a texture, a weight. It sits in the room with them, patient and unhurried, occupying the space between words, between glances, between hands that move close and don't quite touch. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It simply exists, growing quietly, the way things grow in the dark without permission, without apology, without any intention of stopping. Namjoon knew the feeling. He just hadn't expected to feel it here. For her. He'd been telling himself for 3 weeks that it was proximity, that it was gratitude, that it was the particular vulnerability of being new somewhere and having someone see you clearly and mistaking that for something larger than it was. He was running out of ways to believe that. It started, or rather, the pretending stopped on a Tuesday morning in the 4th week of November. Namjoon arrived at his desk to find a small package sitting on his keyboard. No card, no label, just a flat rectangular box, neatly wrapped in brown paper. He looked at Peter. Peter looked at his screen with the dedication of a man who absolutely knew something. Namjoon opened it. Inside was a cookbook, Korean-American fusion, by a chef he'd mentioned once, exactly once, in passing, in the kitchen 2 weeks ago, saying he'd been meaning to buy it but kept forgetting. The cover was worn at one corner, gently, the way things are worn when someone has held them. It wasn't new. It had been someone's. He turned it over. No name. No note. He sat with it in his hands for a moment. Then he got up, took the elevator to the 15th floor, and walked to Selena's office. Her assistant looked up as he approached. "Is she in?" he asked. "She's on a call." "I'll wait," he said pleasantly, and sat in the chair across from the assistant's desk with the cookbook in his lap. He waited 11 minutes. The assistant's phone lit up. A brief exchange. "Then you can go in." Selena was at her desk when he entered, pen in hand, already looking at him with that composed expression that gave nothing away. She was wearing deep green today, a structured dress that made her look like someone who had decided what power looked like and dressed accordingly every morning. Namjoon closed the door behind him, crossed the room, set the cookbook on her desk in front of her. She looked at it, then at him. "I don't know what that is," she said. "You do," he said simply. Not accusatory, just certain. She looked back at the cookbook. Something moved in her jaw, a small tightening, like she was deciding something. "It was just sitting on my shelf," she said finally, her voice very even. "Taking up space." "Your shelf," he repeated. "Yes. So it was yours. It was in my building. On my shelf," she said. Namjoon looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze steadily, with the full magnificent composure of a woman who had built an empire on never being caught off guard. She was absolutely caught off guard. "Thank you," he said softly. "Really?" Something shifted in her eyes. Quick and real and immediately managed. "It was taking up space," she said again, looking back at her papers. He picked up the cookbook and turned to leave. "There's a recipe in chapter 4, she said, not looking up. Her voice was very carefully casual. "With coconut milk. I thought you might find it interesting." He stopped, but he didn't turn around. He stood very still for a moment, feeling something move through his chest, warm and complicated and certain. "I'll try it tonight," he said quietly. In the hallway, he stood for exactly 3 seconds, doing absolutely nothing before he allowed himself to breathe. The tension sharpened after that, made itself at home. It lived in the kitchen in the evenings, in the way she'd started arriving before he called her, as if some part of her had synchronized to his schedule without her consent. In the way she began sitting on the counter properly now, not leaning, coat off sometimes, heels still on because Selena Ellison apparently made concessions one at a time and wasn't ready for both yet. It lived in the meetings, where they disagreed with a specific energy that the rest of the room had started to notice and carefully not comment on. A sharpness that had heat underneath it, arguments that felt too alive to be purely professional. "That's not the right framework," Namjoon said in a Wednesday strategy session, 7 people around the table, his voice respectful but completely firm. "If we scale that way, we're building a ceiling into the architecture. 3 years from now, we'll be tearing it down." "The timeline works," said Marcus from product, nodding at the slide. The timeline works now, Namjoon said. I'm talking about what we're building toward. Mr. Lee. Selena's voice came from the head of the table. Even. Precise. He looked at her. Her eyes were steady on his. Walk me through your alternative. Not your wrong. Not sit down. Just show me. He held her gaze for a half-second that lasted longer than it should have. Then he stood, went to the board, and laid out his framework in clean, clear strokes. The room listened. By the end, even Marcus was nodding. Selena said nothing for a moment after he finished. Adjust the timeline to accommodate this approach, she said to the room. We build it right. Namjoon sat back down. Across the table, Dennis caught his eye and gave him a small, barely there nod. Namjoon looked at his notes, but he felt her eyes on him for the rest of the meeting, and he felt his own pulse doing something inconvenient about it. The first almost moment happened on a Thursday evening in December. The office had emptied early for some end-of-year function that Namjoon hadn't attended because Mia had a slight fever and he'd spent the afternoon working from a corner of the floor with her asleep in the portable crib he'd started keeping near his desk. Her forehead cool now, her breathing even, her small self completely unbothered by everything. He was relieved enough to feel the tension leave his shoulders for the first time all day. He was in the kitchen making her congee soft rice porridge, the food his mother had made whenever he was sick as a child, the food that meant you were taken care of in a language older than words. Simple and slow, the kind of cooking that required patience more than skill. He heard the elevator, then her heels, the pause at the kitchen doorway that had become familiar. You didn't go to the function, he said, not turning around. I went, Selena said, moving into the kitchen. I left early. You don't like them? He asked. I don't like most things that require me to perform enjoyment I don't feel. She leaned against the counter, then looked at the pot. Is she okay? He looked back at her briefly. The question was always about Mia first. She'd started doing that, asking about Mia with the specific matter-of-fact care of someone who didn't want to make a production of the fact that they cared. Better, he said. Fever broke an hour ago. Selena exhaled slightly. Good. He stirred the congee, added a little sesame oil. The kitchen filled with a soft, warm smell. Sit down, he said. She raised an eyebrow. I'm fine standing. You've been on your feet since 7 this morning. He glanced at her. Sit down, Selena. He'd used her name with a particular quiet authority, and they both knew it, and he wasn't sure what had possessed him, but he didn't take it back. She sat down, on a stool at the kitchen island, slowly, like the concession cost her something. He hid whatever was happening in his face by turning back to the stove. They were quiet for a while. The good kind. Tell me something, she said eventually. Her voice was different in the evenings, less armored. He noticed everything about her now, which was its own kind of problem. What kind of something? He asked. Anything. She paused. Something real. He thought about it as he stirred the pot slowly. I used to be afraid of New York, he said. When I first got here, not the city itself, the idea that I'd chosen it and it might not choose me back. He paused. I'd never been somewhere so indifferent to whether I existed. Selena was quiet. Does it still feel that way? She asked. He considered it honestly. Less, he said. Recently. Less. He didn't look at her when he said it, but he felt the shift in the room. Your turn, he said. I didn't agree to a turn, she said. You asked for something real, he said pleasantly. That's a real conversation. Real conversations go both ways. There was a pause. Then she made a small sound, not quite a laugh, but the private cousin of one, the kind she kept very close. I used to sleep in my office, she said. The first 2 years, when the company was new and everything was fragile. She paused. Not because I had to, because I didn't know what to do with the apartment. It was too quiet. He turned to look at her then. She was looking at her hands around her mug. Quiet is hard when you're not used to it, he said carefully. Quiet is hard when it's the sound of being alone, she said, very matter-of-factly. Like she was reporting a weather condition rather than something that had shaped her. I filled it with work. Work is never quiet. And now, he asked softly. She looked up at him. The kitchen felt very small, suddenly. He was a foot away from her. He'd moved without noticing. The way you move toward warmth in a cold room without making a conscious decision about it. She was looking at him with that expression, the one that was almost nothing, almost composed, almost Selena Ellison Untouchable CEO, but underneath it, she was just a woman sitting in a kitchen at the end of a long day, and she looks tired of the walls, he thought. She looks so tired of the walls. Selena, he said, quietly, just her name. She looked at him, really looked at him. And for a moment the careful distance between them, the professional boundary, the unspoken agreement to stay on the right side of whatever this was became very thin. His hand moved, just slightly, toward the counter where hers rested. His fingers almost touched hers. Almost. But then her phone rang. The sound cracked through the kitchen like something physical. Selena's eyes dropped immediately, the composure snapping back into place with a speed that told him she'd been holding it by a thread too. She looked at the screen. Something changed in her face, sharp and unreadable and different from the softness of a moment ago. She slid off the stool. I have to take this. Selena! But she was already in the hallway, phone to her ear, voice low and controlled, and the kitchen was just a kitchen again, and his hand was on the counter where hers had been, and the moment was gone. He stood very still. Then he turned back to the stove and finished the congee. She was different after that call. Not dramatically. Not in a way that anyone else would have noticed. But Namjoon noticed because he'd been paying the kind of attention you pay to things that matter, and what he saw concerned him. She was sharper in meetings. More clipped. She'd always been direct, but now there was an edge to it that felt like something pressurized, like someone managing a situation that was threatening to get away from them. She stopped coming to the kitchen. 3 evenings in a row, nothing. He cooked anyway. Left food in the fridge, with his usual note. It went untouched. On the 4th evening, he looked up from his desk to see her crossing the engineering floor at 8 p.m. in full coat, phone in hand, moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with the building she was walking through. Selena! He stood. She slowed but didn't stop. Good night, Namjoon. Hey! His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. She turned just slightly. He looked at her face, at the controlled lines of it, at the thing she was holding very tightly behind her eyes. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, evenly. You're not, he said, not unkindly, just clearly. Something moved across her face. Quickly. Get some rest, she said and kept walking. He watched her go. He sat back down slowly, looked at his screen without seeing it. Something happened on that call, he thought. Something she's handling alone. He'd seen that before. The specific posture of someone carrying something heavy and refusing to put it down, because putting it down meant admitting it existed. He knew it, because he'd worn it for 2 years. He turned back to his work. But a thread of worry had installed itself somewhere in his chest, quiet and persistent, and it didn't shift. He found out about Victor Hale the way he found out most things about Selena. Sideways, by accident, while paying attention. He was in the server room on the 14th floor, running a diagnostic on the newly fixed gateway, when he heard voices through the half-open door. He wasn't eavesdropping, he simply went still, the way you go still when the tone of a conversation registers as something important before your brain catches up. Selena! And a man he didn't recognize. I told you this wasn't a conversation I was willing to have. Selena's voice was cold. The particular register she used when she was in full control of a situation and wanted the other person to know it. And I told you. The man's voice was smooth, patient in the way that power makes people patient. That the conversation was happening whether you were willing or not. I've been very generous with you, Selena. That generosity has a shape. Your generosity, Selena said, is a leash you've been trying to put around my neck since the day you wrote that check. I've paid back every cent with interest. We're done. We're done, the man said slowly. When I say we're done. There was a pause. And when he continued, his voice had changed, still smooth, but with something underneath it now, something with teeth. I'm asking for one thing. A small thing. A name in a database. An access point. No. Selena. His voice was harsher now. I said no. Her voice dropped. Quiet and absolute. Get out of my building. There was silence. Then footsteps. Then the sound of an elevator. Then nothing. Namjoon stood very still in the server room, diagnostic running quietly beside him, his mind turning over what he'd heard with the systematic precision of someone who built systems for a living and understood access points and databases and what people wanted them for. He stayed in the server room for a long time after the diagnostic finished. That evening he made soft tofu stew, spicy and deep. He'd needed to do something with his hands. He'd needed to think. He was plating it when he heard the elevator, then her heels. They stopped outside the kitchen doorway longer than usual, like she was deciding. Then she came in. She looked tired. Not physically. Selena never looked physically tired. She seemed to run on something more durable than sleep. But there was something in her eyes tonight. Something worn around the edges. She looked at the pot, then at him. "You're still cooking," she said. Her voice was careful. "I'm always cooking," he said. He portioned the stew, set a bowl in front of her usual spot at the island without asking. "Sit down." She sat, then he sat across from her. "I heard something today," he said quietly. "I wasn't trying to. I was in the server room." Her expression didn't change, but something behind it went very still. "Namjoon, I'm not asking you to explain it," he said. "I'm not asking for anything." He held her gaze steadily. "I just want you to know that I heard it, and that whatever it is, you don't look like someone who should be carrying it alone." The kitchen was very quiet. Selena looked down at her bowl. Her jaw worked slightly. He watched the complicated machinery of a very private person deciding something, and he waited, giving her all the room there was. "His name is Victor Hale," she said finally. Her voice was low, controlled, like she was reading from a document rather than speaking from inside something painful. "He funded this company when I was 22 and had an idea and no money and nowhere to go. He was not kind about it. I mean," she stopped. "He was kind about it in all the ways that looked like kindness until later. Until you understand what the kindness was for." Namjoon said nothing. He just stayed. "He wants access to our user database," she said. "Infrastructure access. The kind that would let him..." She stopped again. "It doesn't matter exactly what he'd do with it. It matters that I built this company on the promise that the people who trusted it were safe. And he wants me to break that promise." "And you said no," Namjoon said. "I always say no," she said. "He always comes back." She looked up. "He's more persistent than he used to be, which means he's under pressure from somewhere, which means he's more dangerous than he used to be." Namjoon held her gaze. "Is he dangerous?" he asked. Carefully. "To you personally?" Her eyes were steady. "He can be." Something moved through Namjoon's chest. A response he hadn't expected. Not fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something protective and certain. "Okay," he said. She looked at him. "Okay. Okay," he said again, picking up a spoon. "Now eat your food." She stared at him for a moment, like he'd said something in a language she understood but hadn't expected to hear. "Did you just tell me to eat my food?" she said. "Your stew is getting cold," he said pleasantly. Something moved across her face. That almost thing. The shape of something she kept very close. She picked up her spoon and they ate. And in the quiet of the kitchen, in the warmth of the food between them, Namjoon let himself think clearly about what he'd heard in the server room, about access points and databases and what a man like Victor Hale would need them for, and something in his mind was already building, already mapping, already working on a problem that wasn't his to solve and that he was going to solve anyway. Because that was what he did, and because she mattered. In a way he was done pretending she didn't. It had been a long week, the kind where everything goes slightly wrong at the same time and you hold it together through sheer stubbornness and the knowledge that Friday exists. Namjoon had been in back-to-back sessions troubleshooting a new system vulnerability unrelated to Victor, just the ordinary chaos of infrastructure, and Selena had been in and out of difficult meetings about a partnership deal that kept threatening to collapse. They'd crossed paths 4 times during the day without more than a few words. Each time he'd looked at her and she'd looked at him, and there was that current, present, patient waiting. At 7 p.m. the floor was empty. He was shutting down his workstation when the elevator opened and she walked out still in her meeting clothes, heels in her hand, actually in her hand, carrying them, walking in socked feet across the engineering floor, which he was fairly certain was a level of informality he'd never seen from her before. He stared. She stopped when she saw him, looked at her own feet, then at him. "Not a word," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything," he chuckled. "You were thinking something." "I was thinking you look like you need food," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she exhaled long and slow. "I do need food," she admitted. He made glass noodles with vegetables and beef, one of the more involved dishes in his repertoire, the kind that required both hands and real attention. He needed the work tonight. She sat on the counter properly, shoes on the floor beside her, watching him with her knees drawn up slightly, arms around them, and she looked young. Not young like inexperienced. Young like unguarded. Like the version of herself that existed before the empire. He glanced at her occasionally. She caught him each time and didn't look away first anymore. They talked. The kind of conversation that moves between subjects the way water moves, finding its own level. She told him about the partnership deal, the specific frustration of watching people underestimate her and then having to decide whether to correct them efficiently or devastatingly. He laughed at that, and she looked at him when he laughed with an expression he couldn't fully read but felt. He told her about a project he dreamed about before Yuna, before all of it. An app infrastructure he designed in his head during his commutes in Seoul, something genuinely new, something he'd never built because life had moved the wrong way. "Build it," she said immediately. He glanced at her. "It's just an idea." "All of this was just an idea," she said, gesturing at the building around them. "Ideas are the only things worth building." She held his gaze. "So build it." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said quietly, like a promise. She held his gaze a second longer than necessary, then looked at the food. "Is it done?" she asked. "Almost." He plated the japchae, handed her bowl over. She took it from him, and their fingers touched just briefly, just the transfer of a bowl, the most ordinary contact, but neither of them moved for a moment after. His fingers on the bowl. Hers. The small warm overlap. He looked up. She was looking at him. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the city pressed its noise against the windows, and in here there was just the food going warm between them, the light low and yellow, the distance of about 6 inches between his face and hers, and her eyes, dark and steady, and for once entirely unguarded. "Selena," he said, very quietly. She didn't answer, but she didn't move back either. His free hand moved to the counter beside her, not touching her, just near, just present. His thumb almost brushed her knee. She looked at his hand, then back at his face. Namjoon, his name in her mouth, low and careful, like she was trying out the weight of a decision. "I know," he said softly. "Tell me to stop." She looked at him. She didn't tell him to stop. He leaned in slowly, the way you move toward something you've been moving toward for a long time without letting yourself know it. And she was leaning too. Barely, and he was close enough to see the exact moment something shifted in her eyes. Her phone rang and they both went still. It rang again. Selena closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she was off the counter, the composure back, the distance reinstated, phone in hand, and she was already answering before Namjoon had fully processed what had just almost happened. "Ellison!" Her voice was completely professional. She moved to the kitchen doorway. "When?" She sounded concerned as she spoke on the phone. "Don't touch anything. I'm on my way." She ended the call. She looked at him briefly, with an expression he couldn't parse, something complicated and regretful and restrained, and then she was gone. Heels back on, coat from the hallway, elevator gone. Namjoon stood in the kitchen alone. He looked at the 2 plates of japchae. At the counter where she'd been sitting, he pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and stood very still for a long moment. Then he sat down, pulled both plates toward him, and ate alone in the warm kitchen while the city outside went on being enormous and indifferent and completely unbothered. The next morning, she was different. He knew before he saw her. Something in the atmosphere of the building, a particular quality of distance that radiated outward from the 15th floor. He felt it when he stepped off the elevator onto 12. Peter felt it. "Something's up with the queen bee today," Peter said quietly, not looking up from his screen. Marcus went up there 20 minutes ago looking normal and came back looking like he'd been briefly disassembled. Namjoon said nothing. He saw her at noon, crossing the lobby with 2 people he didn't recognize, men in expensive suits. Her face was composed and impenetrable, and she didn't look toward the elevator bank where he was waiting. He looked at her anyway. At 3 p.m. her assistant appeared on the 12th floor to deliver a revision request for his documentation. It was not unusual, except that she could have emailed it, had emailed everything before. He read between the lines with the fluency of someone who had been paying attention. She's pulling back, he thought. She's decided to pull back. Something tightened in his chest. Not anger because he understood it. He understood the mechanics of self-protection too well to be angry about them. But understanding something and being unaffected by it were different things. For 4 days, she was professional and correct and entirely distant. She responded to his work with precise, useful feedback delivered through her assistant or in group settings. She didn't appear in the kitchen. She didn't come to the engineering floor after hours. She was Selena Ellison, CEO, the Untouchable version. Every wall rebuilt and mortared. Namjoon let it sit for 4 days. On the 5th day, at 6:30 p.m., he took the elevator to 15. Her assistant looked up. "Mr. Lee, is she in?" he asked. "She's asked not to be." "Tell her I'll be brief," he said. "Please." The assistant hesitated, then picked up the phone. A brief exchange. Then with the expression of someone who had just watched something interesting happen and intended to remember it, she said, "Go in." Selena was at her desk. She looked up when he entered, and her face was composed and careful and told him nothing. He crossed the room, didn't sit, stood in front of her desk with his hands in his pockets, steady and quiet, looking at her. "You don't have to do that with me," he said. She held his gaze. "Do what?" "This." He said it simply, without accusation. "The distance. The walls. Whatever happened, whatever you decided, you don't have to do that with me." Selena set her pen down. Her hands were still on the desk, perfectly composed, but he saw the slight tension in her fingers. "Namjoon," she said carefully. "What happened the other night?" "Almost happened," he said. "Almost happened," she conceded. Her voice was very controlled. "It was real," he said quietly. She looked at him. "Whatever you're about to call it," he said. "I just need you to know it was real. That's all. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not trying to push." He held her gaze steadily. "But I'm not going to pretend it wasn't what it was, and I'm not going to let you do that either. Not with me." The room was very quiet. Selena looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face, complicated and layered and real. Then she looked away, at the window at the city outside. "You don't know what I am," she said quietly. It was the most unguarded thing she'd said, yet not a deflection. An actual statement, a warning from somewhere genuine. "Then show me," he said. She turned back. He held her gaze, completely certain of what he wanted. "Show me," he'd said. Not "I'm not afraid," not "it doesn't matter," not the empty brave things people said when they hadn't fully considered the cost. Just show me. Like whatever she was, he intended to see it clearly. Something in Selena's face shifted. She didn't speak for a long moment. "I need..." She started then stopped. Her jaw tightened slightly. "I need you to give me time." He nodded. "Okay." Not because. She paused again, and he could see the effort it took her, the enormous careful effort of someone learning to say things out loud that they'd only ever kept inside. "Not because I don't." She stopped again, then looked at her hands. "I just need time." "Okay," he said again. Softly, she looked up at him. In her eyes, behind everything, behind the composure and the control and the magnificent architecture of everything she'd built to stay safe, he saw it. Clear and real and a little afraid. She feels it too, he thought. She's known it longer than I have, and she's terrified. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, certain and quiet and final. Then he turned to leave. "Namjoon," she called out. He stopped and turned back. She was looking at him with that expression, the one that was almost nothing and was everything. "The food you left in the fridge," she said. "The last few days." The corner of her mouth moved barely, just barely. "It was good." He looked at her. He felt something warm and real and uncontainable move through his chest. "I know," he said simply. She pressed her lips together, not to hide a smile exactly, more like to hold one safely inside for a little longer. Then he left. In the elevator, he stood with his back against the mirrored wall and looked at the ceiling and breathed. And for the first time since the almost moment in the kitchen, he felt something settle in him. Not resolution, not arrival, but the particular piece of a man who has said the true thing and been met with something true in return. "Give me time," she'd said. He could do time. He'd been building things slowly for 2 years. He knew how to wait for something worth waiting for. That evening, Namjoon sat on the floor of his apartment, Mia asleep in her room, the city outside doing its enormous and different thing, and he opened the cookbook Selena had given him. He turned to chapter 4. The recipe she'd mentioned was marked by a tiny, precise fold at the corner of the page. Barely there. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. He smoothed the page open gently. Coconut and ginger braised chicken. His grandmother's kind of recipe, slow, careful, built on patience. He read it twice. Then he closed the book and held it in his lap and sat quietly in the warm, small apartment that was slowly starting to feel like somewhere, and thought about a woman on the 15th floor who had folded a page for him weeks ago and handed it over wrapped in deflection, and who had sat on a kitchen counter in her socked feet and looked young and unguarded and real. And he thought, I'll make it for her. When she's ready, I'll make it for her. Love stories like these? Subscribe for more besties. December in New York had a particular cruelty to it. Not the cold Namjoon had grown up with Seoul winters. He knew cold in the bone-deep personal way of someone who had walked to school in it, studied in it, fallen in love for the first time in it. New York cold was different but not worse. What was cruel about December here was the light. The way it came in low and sideways and made everything look simultaneously beautiful and temporary, like the city was reminding you that all of this, the buildings, the noise, the lives stacked on top of each other in their small warm boxes, was borrowed, was passing. He'd been feeling it more than usual lately. He sat at his kitchen table at 6 a.m., Mia still asleep, coffee going warm in his hands, and he thought about the conversation in Selena's office. About the way she'd said, I need time, not as an excuse, not as a dismissal, but as something real, offered carefully, like something she'd had to dig for. Give me time. He would. He already knew he would. What he hadn't quite worked out was what to do with himself in the meantime, with the feeling that had installed itself in his chest without asking, that had no intention of being quiet about it even when he needed it to be. He drank his coffee. From down the hall, Mia made a sound. The early morning inventory sound she made every day, cataloging the world, checking it was still there. He got up to get her. The engineering team shipped the gateway fix on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before Christmas. It went live at 6 p.m., and Namjoon sat at his desk watching the monitoring dashboard with the specific, tense attention of someone who has built a thing and is waiting to see if it holds. Peter sat beside him, equally tense, pretending to be casual. For 20 minutes there was nothing. The system ran. Clean, fast, elegant. Then Dennis appeared from his office, looked at the dashboard, looked at Namjoon, then broke into a wide, uncomplicated grin. That's it, Dennis said. That's the one. 8 months of trying, and you did it in 6 weeks. Peter made a sound that was professionally restrained and personally extremely pleased. Namjoon exhaled, long and slow. The kind of exhale that carries a month of sustained concentration out with it. Good work, Dennis said, clapping him on the shoulder. Genuinely. Let's get everyone together tomorrow, I want to. The elevator opened, and Selena walked out. The floor went to the particular quality of alert that her presence always produced, not fear, just attention, the room orienting to her the way rooms did. She was in charcoal today, a long, structured coat over dark trousers, and she crossed directly to Namjoon's station without stopping. She looked at the dashboard, then at him. It held, she asked. It held, he said. Something moved across her face. Not a smile exactly, but the internal architecture of one. The satisfaction of a thing built right, witnessed by someone who understood what that meant. Good, she said simply. But she stayed there for a moment, standing beside his desk, looking at the clean green lines of the dashboard, and it was such a small thing. Standing there, but it wasn't nothing. It was her, on the engineering floor, at 6 p.m., having come down to see. Good work, Dennis, she said, already turning. All of you. She went back to the elevator. Peter turned to Namjoon very slowly. She came down, Peter said. She came to check on the system, Namjoon said. She has remote monitoring on her phone, Peter said. She has never once come down to check on a system in person. She came down because you were here. Peter nudged his shoulder with a knowing smile. Namjoon looked at his screen. Get back to work, Peter, he said. Peter turned back to his monitor, smiling at it with great serenity. The call from Yuna came on a Wednesday. Not a hint this time. Not the careful, feeling out call of someone testing water temperature. This one was direct. The way Yuna was direct when she'd made up her mind, clear and warm and slightly dangerous in the way of someone who believed their own narrative completely. Namjoon was in the stairwell when it came. He'd stepped out to take a personal call from Mrs. O about Mia's pediatric appointment, and was heading back up when his phone buzzed again immediately after. He looked at the screen, then he answered. "I'm in New York," Yuna said. He stopped walking. "Since when?" he said. It wasn't a question. 3 days ago. I wanted to see Mia. Something cold and careful moved through him. "You wanted to see Mia," he repeated, his voice very even. "Namjoon, I know what you must be. Do you think you know anything?" he said harshly. "I made a mistake," she said. Soft now. The voice she used when she wanted something. He'd loved that voice once. Now it made him feel tired in a specific, flavorless way. "I wasn't ready. I know that's not. I know it doesn't fix anything. But she's my daughter too." "She is," he said carefully. "Legally. Biologically. She is." He started walking again, slowly up the stairs. "But you don't get to disappear for 18 months and then arrive in New York and call it seeing your daughter. That's not how this works. I'm not trying to take her from you." "I know you're not," he said. "Because you won't." "I have a lawyer," Yuna said quietly. Not as a threat, or rather, as the kind of thing that isn't meant as a threat and is one anyway. Namjoon stopped on the landing between 11 and 12. "So do I," he said. "This was not currently true. We'll do this properly, Yuna. Through the right channels. Whatever that looks like." His voice was steady. "But you don't show up in my city and call me out of nowhere and expect me to hand you access to my daughter's life because you've decided you're ready." "I'll be in touch," he said. "Through lawyers. That's how we do this." Then he ended the call. He stood on the landing for a moment, the stairwell quiet around him, the city muffled behind the walls, and he breathed. In through the nose. Let the chest open. His hands were not shaking. He was slightly surprised by that. He thought about Mia, about her face in the morning, that inventory sound, the way she said hi to exactly the people she wanted to say it to. About what it would mean to navigate a custody situation in a country where he had no family, limited network, and a demanding job. He thought about what Selena had said. Don't let someone else's choices make you forget what you're worth. He went back upstairs. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, found the name of the best family law firm in New York, then made a note of the number. Then he went back to work, because that was what he had. That was what he'd always had. He didn't tell Selena. Not because he was hiding it, he wasn't built for hiding things. It cost him too much energy. But because she was dealing with something of her own, the Victor Hale situation casting its shadow over everything, and he didn't want to arrive in her office with his own emergency and make the thing between them transactional. He wasn't interested in a relationship, whatever shape it was, or wasn't taking built on the exchange of crises. So he carried it. Quietly, efficiently, in the particular way he'd learned to carry things over the past 2 years. He called the law firm, scheduled a consultation for the following week. He told Mrs. O, who received the information with the stoic gravity of a woman who had seen a great deal of life and was not easily alarmed. "She wants to come back now," Mrs. O said in Korean, setting tea in front of him at her kitchen table while Mia played on the floor between them. "When the hard part is over." "Yes," he said. "What will you do?" "Protect Mia," he said. "Whatever it costs." Mrs. O looked at him over her tea. "And yourself? Will you protect yourself too?" He looked at Mia, who was attempting to stack her rings on Bok's head with intense concentration. "I'm working on it," he said. He broke at 2 a.m. on a Thursday. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just alone in his apartment. Mia asleep, the city outside doing its restless all-night thing. Sitting on the floor with his back against the couch because he'd sat down there and couldn't quite find the energy to move. The consultation had gone while the lawyer had been clear, methodical, reassuring in a professional way that meant she'd seen this before and knew how it went. Yuna's position was not as strong as it could be, given the circumstances of Mia's first 18 months. It wasn't impossible, but it wasn't simple. Not simple, he thought, staring at the middle distance. Nothing is simple. He thought about Seoul, about the apartment where he'd grown up, warm and small, his grandmother's plants in every window. About the person he'd been before he'd loved Yuna, before he'd followed her here, before the whole architecture of his future had been built on a foundation that turned out to be someone else's convenience. He thought about Mia. He thought about Selena. And sitting on the floor of his New York apartment at 2 a.m., He let himself feel the full accumulated weight of all of it. The 2 years of holding, the constant managing, the relentless forward motion of a man who didn't have the luxury of stopping. He let it sit on his chest fully, without managing it, without redirecting it into productivity. He didn't cry. He wanted to. He sat with the wanting to and didn't. He just breathed. In through the nose. Let the chest open. From down the hall Mia made a sound. Just a sleeping sound. A small subconscious announcement. He got up and walked to her room. She was on her side, Bach tucked under her arm, her small face completely relaxed in sleep. She looked so much like herself. So entirely, specifically, irreducibly herself. This small person who had arrived into the wreckage of his life and was somehow both the heaviest and the most bearable thing in it. He crossed the room, sat on the floor beside her crib, his back against it, knees drawn up. He stayed there for a long time. He didn't feel better, but he felt located, grounded in the specific geography of what mattered, which was sometimes enough to get to morning. 3 days later, Namjoon arrived at work to find something waiting on his desk. Not a package this time. A name on a sticky note, in handwriting he didn't recognize, clean, precise, economic. The name of a family lawyer. Underneath it, in the same hand, best in the city. Already briefed on your situation. First consultation covered. No signature. He sat very still for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and Googled the name. The lawyer was, in fact, extraordinary. 3 lines into the bio he could see that. 15 years of family law, a particular specialization in international custody cases, a track record that made his current lawyer look like a study session. Already briefed on your situation. He put the phone down. He looked at the sticky note. Then he looked at the elevator. Her assistant started to say something when he stepped off on 15. He kept walking, knocked twice on Selena's office door, and opened it without waiting. She was on a call. She looked up sharply. He held up the sticky note. Something moved across her face. She held up one finger telling him to wait and said into the phone, "I'll call you back," and ended it before the other person had responded. She set the phone down. He crossed the room, set the sticky note on her desk in front of her. "How did you know?" he asked. His voice was quiet, not angry, just direct. Selena looked at the note, then at him. "I have resources," she said carefully. "Selena!" He held her gaze. "How did you know about Yuna?" She leaned back slightly in her chair. Her hands were still on the desk, composed, but he saw it again, that slight tension in her fingers, the tell she didn't know she had. "I pay attention," she said. "To me," he said. She held his gaze steadily. "To the people in my company." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been paying attention to me specifically," he said. Not a challenge, just a fact laid out plainly between them, asking to be acknowledged. The silence that followed was the kind that has a shape, a weight. Selena looked at him with her full, undeflected attention, and for once she didn't reach for the composure immediately. She let the moment exist as what it was. "Yes," she said quietly. "I have." The word landed in the room and stayed. Namjoon felt something move through his chest, warm and complicated and too large for the professional context of this office, of this moment, of everything they'd been carefully maintaining between them. "Thank you," he said softly. "For the lawyer." She nodded once, looking at the note. "She's good," Selena said. "Better than good. Your situation is manageable, Namjoon. It won't be easy, but it's manageable." "How do you know what my situation is?" he asked. And then, reading her expression, "You had someone look into it?" She met his eyes. "I wanted to understand what you were dealing with." He stared at her. "Without telling me," he said. "You weren't telling me," she said. Evenly, not defensively. "You were carrying it alone, the way you carry everything, and I..." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "I wanted to help. By going around me," he said. "By doing what I could do," she said. Her voice sharpening slightly, not in anger, but in the specific energy of someone who is used to solving problems and doesn't always think about the architecture of how before they start. "I have access to things you don't, so I use them." "I should have asked you first," she said. The admission came without drama, but it wasn't effortless either. He could see the cost of it. Selena Ellison, who had built an empire on the supremacy of her own judgment, acknowledging that she'd overstepped. "I should have. I don't always think about the asking part." Namjoon stood in front of her desk, the sticky note between them, and looked at this woman, this complicated, brilliant, armored, genuinely trying woman, and felt the frustration that had walked in with him dissolve into something warmer and less useful for being angry. "Don't do it again," he said. "I won't," she said. "Ask me," he said. "Whatever you want to help with, ask me. I'm not fragile. I can answer." She held his gaze. Something in her expression shifted open slightly, the way it did in the kitchen, in the late evenings, in the moments between the empire and the person. "Okay," she said softly. He picked up the sticky note, folded it, put it in his pocket. "I'm keeping the lawyer," he said. The corner of her mouth moved. "I assumed." Then he turned to leave. "Namjoon," she called out. He turned back. She was looking at him with that expression, the real one, the one beneath everything. "Are you okay?" she asked. Just that. Simple and direct and genuine in the way that things are genuine when they cost something. He considered the question honestly. "Not entirely," he said. "But enough." She nodded slowly, like she understood the precise meaning of enough, like she'd lived there herself. In the hallway, he unfolded the sticky note and looked at it again. Then he folded it back and put it in his breast pocket close. Victor Hale, issue escalated on a Monday. Namjoon found out the way he found out most things, sideways, by paying attention. He was on 14 running system checks when he saw the alert on the network monitoring panel. Not a breach, something more subtle than that. A probe. Someone testing the edges of a system's access points with the careful patience of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. He ran a trace. The origin was masked. Well masked, better than amateur, better than corporate espionage standard, but not better than him. He spent 40 minutes unraveling it, layer by layer, with the focused patience of a man who had built systems and therefore understood exactly how people tried to take them apart. When he found the end point, he sat back in his chair and looked at it for a long time. He picked up his phone and went to the 15th floor. Selena was with two people when he arrived, her head of security and a man in a suit Namjoon didn't recognize, both seated across from her desk. She looked up when he came in, and her expression changed just slightly, just enough to tell him she already knew something. "I need 5 minutes," Namjoon said, looking at her directly. Selena looked at her security head. "Give us the room." When they'd gone, Namjoon crossed to her desk and set his laptop in front of her, the trace results on screen. "Someone's probing your access architecture," he said. "Specifically the user authentication gateway. They're not trying to breach it, yet they're mapping it, learning its shape." He looked at her. "This is Hale." Selena looked at the screen. Her face was composed, but her stillness had a different quality now. "How long?" she asked. "The probe pattern suggests he started 4 days ago," Namjoon said. "Carefully. Slowly. He's not rushing." "He wouldn't," she said quietly. "Victor doesn't rush." She stood, walked to the window, stood with her back to him, arms crossed, looking at the city. Namjoon gave her the moment. "He's escalating because someone is pressuring him," she said finally to the window. "Victor moves when he's pushed. He's been pushed by someone with more power than him, which means this is bigger than I thought." She paused. "He needs what's in that database, and he's running out of time to ask nicely." "Then we don't give him time," Namjoon said. She turned and looked at him. "I've been looking at his financial architecture," Namjoon continued, "since the night you told me about him. I know what he does." He held her gaze steadily. "He runs shell companies. The whole network is held together by access to legitimate data sources that make the shells look real. Your user database isn't the goal, it's infrastructure for something else. Something much larger." Selena looked at him. "You've been working on this," she said slowly. "On your own. Since the server room," he said simply. "Yes." "Namjoon." There was something in her voice. "He's vulnerable," Namjoon said, because this was what mattered. This was what he'd stayed up 3 nights to find. The whole network depends on data integrity. Shell companies need clean paper trails. If the data sources he's relying on are compromised, if someone files the right reports with the right regulatory bodies, the shells collapse. He paused. "He doesn't need your database, Selena. He needs it because the ones he was relying on are already being questioned. He's patching a hole." Selena looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not the composure, not the warmth she kept carefully managed, Not even the vulnerable, unguarded moments in the kitchen. Something else, something that looked like being genuinely moved. Like watching someone do something remarkable and not having the distance to pretend you're not affected. "You could have told me when you started," she said quietly. "I wanted to be sure first," he said. "I didn't want to bring you a theory. I wanted to bring you a solution." She looked at him for a long moment. "Show me everything," she said. They worked for 4 hours, side by side at her desk, cross-referencing his findings with her own knowledge of Victor's network, her contacts, her understanding of the regulatory landscape. They worked with the specific efficiency of two people who think at similar speeds and have stopped managing their dynamic, just letting the collaboration run clean. It was the closest they'd been physically, logistically, in the continuous shared focus of it since any of the kitchen evenings. And it was different, less tentative, less careful, like something had moved between them into a register that didn't need the careful management anymore. At some point she'd taken her blazer off. At some point he'd rolled his sleeves up. At some point the professional distance that lived in their body language had quietly, without announcement, stopped. She leaned over to point at something on his screen, and her shoulder was against his, and neither of them moved away. "Here," she said, her finger on the screen. "This entity, GV Holdings. It shows up in 3 of the shell structures. If this is the linchpin..." "It is," he said. "Take that out, and the whole left side of the network has no legitimate anchor." He traced the structure on screen. His hand was close to hers. One regulatory filing, SEC, or FinCN, given the international components, probably both. Coordinated, so he can't respond to one before the other lands. Selena pulled back slightly to look at the full picture. He watched her think, watched the specific quality of her concentration, the way her eyes moved across information, the small tension in her jaw that meant she was building something in her mind. "I have a contact at the SEC," she said slowly. "Former colleague. She owes me nothing, but she respects clean evidence." She looked at him. "If your documentation is airtight..." "It's airtight," he said. She looked at him, then at the screen, then back at him. "You built this in your spare time," she said, "while managing a custody situation and a full workload, and..." "I had something worth protecting," he said simply. The room was very quiet. Selena looked at him, and something happened in her face, slow and real and unmanaged, the way the things you've been holding back move when you stop holding them. Her eyes were very steady on his, and in them he could see it, clearly and completely, the thing she'd been keeping close since the beginning. "Selena!" he said quietly. "Don't," she said. Her voice was soft. Not cold, nothing like cold. Just careful. The care of someone standing at the edge of something large. "I'm not pushing," he said. "I told you I wouldn't." "I know," she said. She looked at her hands on the desk. "I know you're not." She was quiet for a moment. "I just need you to understand that this," she gestured between them, small and precise, "is not something I know how to do." "I know," he said. "I have..." She paused, choosing carefully. "I have done a great deal of damage to things that got close to me. Not intentionally. Just..." She stopped. "I don't have a good history with letting people in, Namjoon. And the ones I've let in have either left or been hurt by what I am." She looked at him. Her eyes were very direct. "I don't want that for you." He looked at her for a long time. "Who decided that's what would happen?" he asked gently. She frowned slightly. "History. History is a pattern," he said. "Not a sentence." He held her gaze. "I'm not the people who left. And I'm not easily hurt. Everyone says that," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." She looked at him long, searching, the full attention of a woman who had built an empire on reading situations correctly and was trying to read this one. "Time," she said softly. "A reminder. An asking." "Still yours," he said. Something moved through her face, profound and complicated and real. She looked back at the screen. "Let's finish this," she said. He turned back to his laptop, but her shoulder was still against his, and neither of them moved away. The filing went in on a Thursday, coordinated across 2 regulatory bodies, clean and precise, and devastating in the specific way that good documentation is devastating, not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. By Friday afternoon, Victor Hale's lawyers had called Selena's lawyers 3 times. Selena took none of the calls. She sent a single message through her legal team. "We have nothing to discuss." Namjoon was at his desk when she called him. It's done, she said. Her voice was even, but underneath it, something that sounded like exhale, like a long-held breath finally released. Good, he said. Thank you, she said, quietly, like the word came from somewhere real and it cost her the right amount to say it. You built the company worth protecting, he said. I just helped protect it. Namjoon. Her voice was different now. Lower. The register she used in the kitchen, in the evenings, when the empire was somewhere else, and it was just the two of them in something true. Yeah, he said quietly. Come up, she said simply. He was already standing. Her office was lit low when he arrived, the overhead off. Just the lamp on her desk and the city through the glass, that winter light coming in sideways in gold. She was standing at the window when he entered. Coat off, shoes off, just socked feet on the hardwood, the way she'd crossed the engineering floor that Friday evening weeks ago. He closed the door. She turned when she heard it. They looked at each other across the room. He crossed it slowly. She watched him come, and she didn't move back, didn't reach for the composure, didn't build anything between them. She just stood at the window in the low light and watched him come to her. He stopped a foot away. Up close, in the quiet of the room, he could see everything, the exhaustion beneath the composure, real and earned. The thing in her eyes that had been building since the first evening in the kitchen. The woman underneath, everything she'd built to survive, standing there in socked feet, looking at him like she was deciding to. Hi, he said softly. Something moved across her face. The shape of that almost smile, the one she kept so close. Hi, she said. He raised his hand slowly, gave her every opportunity to step back. His fingers touched her jaw, just the lightest contact, just the backs of his fingers against the line of her face, a question rather than a statement. She didn't step back. She didn't step back. She looked up at him, and in her eyes, clear and real and slightly terrified in the way of someone who has decided to be brave, he saw the answer. He leaned in and she met him halfway. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, the careful first language of two people who have been learning each other slowly and are now saying something out loud for the first time. Her hand came up to his chest, not pushing, just landing there, feeling the realness of him. His other hand moved to the curve of her shoulder, holding gently, giving her every exit if she needed one. She didn't need one. The kiss deepened. Not rushed, nothing between them had ever been rushed. Everything had been slow and earned and weighted with everything that had come before it. She kissed him like someone who had been making a decision for a long time and had finally arrived at it, and he kissed her back like someone who had known this was coming and had waited for it to be exactly right. When they pulled back, they stayed close, foreheads almost touching. Her eyes were closed for a moment. His thumb moved gently along her jaw. She opened her eyes. They looked at each other in the low light of her office, the city golden and enormous behind the glass, and neither of them spoke because there was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She laughed. Soft, quiet, private, the laugh of someone surprised by their own feeling. She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth and looked at him over it with bright, unguarded eyes, and he felt something so large move through his chest that he had to look away for a second to contain it. What? He said, smiling despite himself. Nothing, she said. She shook her head, slightly. I don't do this. I know, he said gently. It's strange, she said. Good strange or good, she said quickly. Then quieter, very good. He looked at her. At this woman who had built walls for 20 years and was standing in front of him in her socked feet, having just laughed in the aftermath of a kiss, and looking more like herself than he'd ever seen her. He thought, there she is. That's who she is underneath everything. Okay, he said softly. She straightened slightly, took a breath. Her hand was still on his chest. She hadn't moved it. I'm still. She started. I know, he said. I need to. I know, Selena. He covered her hand on his chest with his, gently. I'm not asking you to have it all figured out. I'm just here. She looked at their hands. Then she looked up at him. And for the first time since he'd known her, Selena Ellison looked completely, entirely at peace. Okay, she said softly, echoing him, like a promise back. He left at 9 p.m. At the elevator, he turned back once. She was standing in her office doorway, leaning slightly against the frame, watching him go. Lamplit behind her, city behind the glass. This woman, who ran empires standing in her socked feet, looking at him with an expression she wasn't managing at all. He pressed the elevator button. "Good night, Selena," he said. "Good night, Namjoon," she said quietly. The doors opened. He stepped in. Just before they closed, he saw her arms crossed loosely now, the smallest smile on her mouth, looking at the floor for a moment before she looked back up. He rode down alone in the mirrored elevator and looked at his reflection and felt something so uncomplicated that it almost confused him. Something he hadn't felt in so long he'd half forgotten it was available to him. He was happy, just quietly happy. He called Mrs. O on the walk to his car. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did. "How is Mia?" he asked. "Asleep since 7, Mrs. O said. "She ate well." She said a new word. He stopped walking. "What word?" A pause. He could hear the smile in Mrs. O's voice. "Lena," she said. He stood on the sidewalk in the December cold, the city enormous around him, and felt something move through his chest that had no name in any of the languages he spoke. "Lena." He looked up at the building. At the 15th floor, where a light still burned. "I'll be home in 20 minutes, he said softly. He walked to his car, and above him, on the 15th floor of Ellison Tech, Selena stood at her window looking down at the street at the tall figure moving through the cold toward the parking structure, hands in pockets, unhurried, and she watched until he was gone. Then she turned back to her desk, sat down and picked up her pen. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, the silence of the office didn't feel like being alone. It felt like waiting for something good. Remember to subscribe, my dearies. The thing about walls is that they don't fall all at once. That's what people get wrong about walls. They imagine the dramatic version, the sudden collapse, the moment of impact, rubble and dust and everything open at once. But real walls, the ones built over years, built from real material, from real pain, they come down differently. A brick here, a brick there, slowly, quietly, in the particular order that safety allows. Selena had been losing bricks for weeks. She just hadn't been counting. The morning after the kiss, she woke up at 5 a.m. and lay in the dark of her apartment, looking at the ceiling with the specific alertness of someone whose mind had been working while their body slept. She cataloged what she felt, not afraid, or rather, afraid in a way that was different from the fear she knew. Not the fear of threat, of exposure, of someone getting close enough to use what they found. This was softer, more domestic. The fear of someone who has been given something good and is terrified of what they'll do with it. She got up, made coffee, stood at her window watching the city emerge from the dark in layers, first outlines, then details, then the full complicated morning of it. She thought about his hand on her jaw, the careful way he'd moved, giving her every exit, staying when she didn't take them. She thought about his face when she'd laughed, the way he'd looked at her like she'd done something remarkable just by laughing, just by being surprised by her own feeling. She picked up her phone, put it back down, picked it up again. She typed, "Good morning." She stared at it for 30 seconds. She sent it. On the other side of the city, Namjoon's phone lit up on his nightstand at 5:17 a.m. He was already half awake. Mia's early morning inventory sounds had started at 5, the soft cataloging from her room that meant she was awake and taking stock of the world. He reached for the phone and read it. Something warm moved through his chest, slow and certain, like sunrise. He typed back, "Good morning. You're up early." 3 dots appeared immediately. "I'm always up early." "So am I," he typed. Mia's internal clock has no respect for weekends. Selena typed back, "How is she?" He smiled at his phone in the dark of his bedroom, alone, and felt completely, quietly held by the question. "She said a new word yesterday," he typed. "What word?" He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then typed Lena. The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then she finally replied, "That's not a word." "She thinks it is," he typed. "She's very confident about it. She has good taste." Selena sent finally. He pressed his lips together, containing something. "She does," he agreed. They didn't announce anything. There was nothing to announce. Really, they were two people who had kissed once in a low-lit office and were texting at 5 a.m., and neither of those things had a form yet, a shape, a name they'd agreed on. And that was fine. That was right. Neither of them was the kind of person who needed a label before they built the thing the label would describe. What changed was subtler than that. It was the way he looked up when the elevator opened on 12, not because he was expecting anyone, just because some part of him had started listening for her. It was the way she appeared in the kitchen doorway on Tuesday evening and said, "What are you making?" before he'd even turned around, like she already knew she was staying. It was the way Mia said Lena every time Selena's name was mentioned at home, with the specific proprietary confidence of a child who has claimed someone. It was the small things, the accumulated weight of small things. The kitchen on a Wednesday. He was making braised short ribs, slow-cooked, the kind of recipe that required 3 hours and couldn't be rushed. He'd started it at 4 p.m., leaving it to do its work while he finished his day, coming back at 7 p.m. to find the engineering floor empty and the kitchen smelling extraordinary. He was adjusting the seasoning when she appeared. She stopped in the doorway and closed her eyes briefly at the smell. He watched her do it without saying anything, privately delighted by the fact that Selena Ellison, who presented an impenetrable front to every boardroom and negotiating table she'd ever sat at, had a very specific and completely unguarded response to good food. "That's not fair," she said, opening her eyes. "What isn't?" he asked innocently. "That smell." She came in, sat on the counter properly now, the automatic ease of it, without the careful negotiation of a few months ago. "What is it?" "Braised short ribs." He lifted the lid so she could see. "My grandmother's recipe. It takes a long time." She looked into the pot, then at him. "You started this during work hours." "I started it at 4, he said. "My last meeting ended at 3:50. She raised an eyebrow. 10 minutes, Selena, he said. "I gave it 10 minutes. The corner of her mouth moved. She accepted a tasting spoon when he offered it, tasted it slowly. With the focused attention she gave everything. "It needs something," she said. He looked at her. "It needs nothing. It's perfect." "There's something missing," she said very calmly. "There is absolutely nothing missing from my grandmother's recipe. A little sweetness," she said. "Something to balance the—" "Do not," he said, "touch my grandmother's recipe." She looked at him with her full composed attention and held out her hand. He stared at her and she waited. He, against every instinct, handed her the honey. She added the smallest amount, barely anything, a drizzle, precise and minimal, and stirred it in and handed the spoon back. He tasted it, looked at the pot, then looked at her. "Don't," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything," he said. "You were about to say it was better." "I was going to say it was different," he said carefully. "Better," she said. "Different," he said firmly. She looked at him with the patient certainty of someone who knows they're right and is comfortable waiting. He turned back to the stove. "My grandmother," he said, to no one in particular, "would have liked you very much." From behind him she laughed. They ate at the kitchen island side by side, proper plates this time, the good ones he'd found in the back of the cupboard. She'd taken her heels off without ceremony and put them by the door, and she sat in her socked feet eating braised short ribs at 7:30 p.m. in the staff kitchen of her own company with her shoulder against his, and neither of them made anything of it. "Tell me about her," Selena said. "Your grandmother." He looked at her briefly. This was new, her asking for the full story, not just the fragments. She was looking at her plate, but the question was genuine. "Her name was Park Sun Hee," he said. "She was small. Everyone in my family was tall, and she was the small woman who completely controlled every room she walked into without raising her voice once." He smiled at the memory. She cooked everything from instinct. Never measured. Never wrote anything down. I used to follow her around the kitchen when I was small, trying to memorize it all, terrified I'd forget. "Did you?" Selena asked. "Forget?" "Some things," he said. "Not the important ones." He looked at the pot. She used to say food was the only honest language. That you could lie with words and lie with money and lie with your face, but you couldn't lie with what you cooked. It always told the truth about you. Selena was quiet for a moment. "What does tonight's food say about you?" she asked. He considered it. "That I'm someone who takes time with things that matter," he said. "That I don't rush what's worth doing slowly." She turned to look at him, and he met her eyes. The space between them was very small. They were side by side, shoulders touching, and when she turned, her face was close, and he could see everything in it, all the layers she usually managed, presently and completely unmanaged. "Your turn," he said quietly. "Tell me something real." She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at her plate. I used to want to be a teacher, she said, quietly, like the memory lived somewhere tender. When I was small. Before. She paused. Before everything changed, I wanted to teach math. I loved it. The way it was always true. Always the same. You could count on it. I was good at it. My mother used to say I explained things in a way that made sense, that I had patience for the slow learners. She was quiet. I had a lot of patience then. He looked at her profile, at the girl she was describing, inside the woman she'd become. You still do, he said. You're just more selective about who gets it. She glanced at him. You get it, he said simply. Something moved through her face, slow and real and unguarded. Mia gets it, she said, very quietly. He felt the weight of that, the specific significance of her saying Mia's name in this context, including herself in relation to Mia, offering it out loud. She knows, he said gently. She's known since the beginning. Selena looked at her plate. Her fingers moved around her fork. I don't know how to do this, she said. Not distressed, just honest. The clean honesty of someone who has decided to stop pretending. The domestic version of this. The daily version. She paused. I don't have a model for it. What it looks like when it works. Neither do I, he said. My model left. She looked at him. I think we make our own, he said. We figure out what works for us specifically, not anyone else's version. She was quiet for a moment. That sounds. She started. Terrifying, he offered. I was going to say reasonable, she said. But also terrifying. He smiled. Both. She looked at him. And the thing he'd seen in her office the night of the kiss was there again, that undefended, unmanaged expression, the full human face of her. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he said. Mia met Selena properly, not in the office, not in the managed professional context of their working life on a Saturday in January. It was Namjoon's idea. He'd asked carefully, given her the full ability to say not yet, made absolutely clear there was no pressure. She'd been quiet for a moment on the phone. Then she'd said Saturday, tell me what she likes for breakfast. He'd smiled at his phone for a long time after that call. He told her, fruit, soft eggs, anything with a mild sweetness. Toast cut into triangles because Mia found rectangles personally offensive for reasons no one had been able to determine. Selena had said noted. She showed up at his apartment door at 9 a.m. with 2 brown bags and the composed expression of someone who was not, under any circumstances, going to admit to being nervous. She was absolutely nervous. He could see it in the way she held the bags too deliberately, the knuckles slightly more defined than they needed to be. He opened the door, and she looked at him with her eyes doing that thing where they were very steady because she was making them be. Hi, he said. Hi, she said. Then, before he could say anything, don't make it a thing. I'm not making it anything, he said, stepping back to let her in. She stepped inside and looked around his apartment the way she'd looked at it the first time she'd come, taking inventory, reading the space. It was clean, warm, lived in the specific way of a home that belonged to someone who cared about it. Books on the shelf, Mia's drawings taped to the fridge, a small succulent on the window ledge that was thriving under whatever consistent care Namjoon gave it. You kept it alive, she said, nodding at the plant. I tend to things, he said simply. She looked at him. Then she heard the sound from the hallway, the particular deliberate stomping of a toddler who had heard the door and was making haste. Mia appeared around the corner in her pajamas, small dinosaurs on a yellow background, box under one arm, hair in 2 uneven pigtails that Namjoon had clearly done his best with. She stopped when she saw Selena. Then her entire face reorganized itself into pure, uncomplicated joy. Lena, she announced, with the confidence of a child greeting someone who has always been coming. Selena's composure, the beautiful, carefully constructed edifice of it, cracked completely. Not into sadness, into something much more devastating than that. Into pure, open, unprepared feeling, the kind that arrives before you can arrange your face around it. She crouched down, right there in the hallway of Namjoon's apartment, in her coat, with her brown bags. She crouched down to Mia's level. Hi, Mia, she said softly. Mia walked directly to her, box extended in both hands. The offering. The one she gave to the people she decided about. Selena took box with both hands, carefully, like she'd been trusted with something important. Because she had. Thank you, she said seriously, to an 18-month-old, with complete sincerity. Mia patted her knee twice with one hand, then turned and stomped back toward the kitchen, apparently satisfied that the necessary greeting protocols had been completed. Selena stood up slowly. Namjoon was watching her from the kitchen doorway. He'd seen everything. He wasn't going to pretend he hadn't. She looked at him. Her eyes were very bright. She's... Selena started. Stopped. Started again. She's something. She really is, he agreed gently. Selena straightened her coat, held up the bags. I brought fruit. And the eggs. And I may have bought a waffle maker last night. He stared at her. It makes them in dinosaur shapes, she said, with the most carefully neutral expression he'd ever seen on a human face. I thought. He crossed the hallway and kissed her. Just like that, quick, warm, decisive. His hand cupped her face for a moment, and he kissed her and pulled back and looked at her. She blinked. Dinosaur shapes, he said. It seemed relevant, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. It's perfect, he said. You're... He stopped, looked at her, something large and true moving through his face. You're perfect. She looked at him for a moment, the bags in her hands. The waffle maker she'd bought at 10 p.m. the night before because she'd been thinking about a little girl who found rectangles offensive. I'm really not, she said softly. But she was smiling. A full one, the kind she didn't manage or contain. To us you are, he said simply. From the kitchen, Mia banged something against the table twice, her standard signal for breakfast attention. They looked toward the kitchen, then at each other. Selena raised an eyebrow. She's impatient, Namjoon said. I wonder where she gets it, Selena said, already moving toward the kitchen. He followed her, and the apartment was warm and the morning was good, and outside January did its cold and different thing, and in here there was fruit to cut and eggs to make and a waffle maker in a box in a brown bag, and Mia at the kitchen table, regarding them both with the benevolent authority of someone whose plans were going exactly right. Breakfast took 2 hours. Not because it was complicated, because it was good. Because Mia ate her dinosaur waffles with a focus that was almost spiritual, and Selena cut fruit with more precision than the task required, and Namjoon made eggs the way his grandmother taught him. And at some point they were just 3 people in a kitchen on a Saturday morning, and it was so ordinary and so enormous at the same time that Namjoon kept having to look away from it. Selena fed Mia a piece of mango. Mia ate it, looked at her, and said more. More, please, Namjoon corrected from the stove. Mia looked at him, then back at Selena, perfectly willing to wait out the adult technicality. More, please, Mia said, with the politeness of someone who has calculated that this is the fastest route to the mango. Selena gave her more mango, her expression doing the thing it did with Mia, the thing she couldn't quite manage, the open, undefended warmth of it. She's going to run you, Namjoon said pleasantly. She's going to try, Selena said. He glanced back. She was looking at Mia with that expression, and Mia was looking back at her with complete proprietary satisfaction, and something in Namjoon's chest did a thing that had no name in any language and didn't need one. He turned back to the eggs. She already has, he said quietly. She won you in that office in about 4 minutes. 3, Selena said, even quieter. He smiled at the stove. After breakfast, Mia fell asleep on the couch, the swift, total collapse of a toddler who has had a very full morning balk under her chin, 1 foot hanging off the edge with the boneless confidence of the deeply unconscious. Selena sat on the floor beside the couch, her back against the couch cushions, legs stretched out, looking at Mia with that expression she didn't manage when it was just the 3 of them. Namjoon sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He handed her a mug of tea. She took it. They sat in the quiet of the apartment, Mia breathing softly above them, the January light coming through the window pale and clean, and they didn't speak for a while and didn't need to. She's going to need a nap schedule adjustment soon, Selena said eventually. Quietly, so as not to wake Mia. She's fighting sleep in the mornings, which means she's overtired by afternoon. Namjoon looked at her. She looked at her tea. I read about it. Toddler sleep cycles. After she paused. After she started coming to the office sometimes, I wanted to understand. He stared at her. You research toddler sleep? He asked. I research things I care about, she said, with perfect composure. He looked at her profile. At this woman, who ran a company, who had defeated Victor Hale with regulatory filings and sheer precision, who had sat in his kitchen and improved his grandmother's recipe, who had bought a dinosaur waffle maker at 10 p.m., who had researched toddler sleep cycles. Selena, he said. She said, looking at her tea. I'm in love with you, he said. She went very still. The apartment was quiet. Mia breathed. The city moved outside. Selena turned to look at him slowly. Her face was open. Completely, entirely open. No management, no composure, no architecture between what she felt and what she showed. Just her. Just the full human reality of her, looking at him with bright eyes in the January light. Namjoon. She started. Her voice was not steady. You don't have to say it back, he said. Gently. Meaning it. I'm not saying it to get something. I'm saying it because it's true, and I'm done not saying true things. He held her gaze. I love you. That's what's happening. You should know. She looked at him. Her hand moved to his, covered it. Her fingers, cool from the tea mug, lacing through his. She looked at their hands. Then she looked at him. I don't. She started. Stopped. Her jaw worked. He could see the enormous effort of it, not the feeling. The feeling was clearly there, had clearly been there. The saying, the offering of it out loud, to someone for real. I haven't said that to. She stopped again. Take your time, he said quietly. She looked at their hands again. I'm scared, she said. Low and real and the most honest thing she'd said yet. I know, he said. Me too. She looked up at him. You're scared, she said. Like this was new information. Terrified, he said simply. My heart was completely destroyed 18 months ago by someone I trusted with it completely. And here I am. He looked at her, handing it to you. Of course I'm scared. She held his gaze. What if she started. You won't, he said. You don't know that. I know you, he said. I've been paying attention for months. I know how you show up for things that matter. I know what you do when someone you care about is in trouble. He squeezed her hand gently. I know you, Selena. Not the Empire. You. Her eyes were very bright. She started, stopped, then took a breath. That's the most frightening thing anyone has ever said to me. She said. Why? He asked softly. Because I want to be worth it. And I don't always know if I am. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised their joined hands and pressed his lips to the back of hers. Gently. A promise rather than a question. She watched him do it. You are, he said, against her hand. You already are. Selena's eyes were still bright. But she was smiling now, that full smile, the one she didn't contain. And in it was something new, something that hadn't been there before. Peace. The specific peace of someone who has decided to trust something. I love you, she said quietly. Said it like she was learning the shape of it in her mouth, finding that it fit, that it didn't break anything, that the world continued. I love you, Namjoon. I think I have for a while. He looked at her. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at her. This woman, his woman, this complicated, brilliant, terrified, trying, loving woman, and felt it. All of it. The full weight and the full warmth of where they'd arrived. Slowly, carefully, without rushing what was worth doing slowly. He leaned forward and kissed her again. Longer this time. Both hands in it now, his cupping her face, hers on his chest. Mia asleep above them. The apartment warm. The city outside doing its enormous thing and not caring. When they pulled back, she kept her eyes closed for a moment. Then she opened them. Still scared, she said. Good, he said. It means you're paying attention. She laughed. The soft private one, the real one. And he thought, I will hear that laugh for the rest of my life and never stop being grateful for it. 3 weeks later, Yuna's lawyer called Namjoon's lawyer. The case had been filed formally, a petition for partial custody, legally clean and professionally handled. Namjoon had known it was coming. He'd prepared for it. What he hadn't prepared for was how it would feel. He found out on a Tuesday morning. He sat at his desk with the email from his lawyer open on his screen, and he read it twice, and then he just sat very still, his hands flat on the desk, breathing. Peter glanced over. You okay? Fine, Namjoon said. His voice was even. Give me a minute. He took the minute. Then he picked up his phone and called Selena. She answered on the first ring. I need to tell you something, he said. Come up, she said immediately. He told her everything. Sitting across from her desk, his lawyer's email open on his phone, walking her through what had been filed and what it meant and what the likely outcomes were. He told it clearly, without performing strength or fragility, just presenting it as it was a situation, with components, that needed to be handled. She listened without interrupting, her eyes on his face the whole time, that full attention, the kind that didn't waver. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you need? Not here's what I'll do. Not immediate action, immediate solution, the forward thrust of someone who solved problems before you'd finished explaining them. She'd learned that. She'd learned to ask first. He looked at her. I need Mia to be okay, he said. Whatever the legal outcome. She will be, Selena said, steady and certain. Because she has you. He held her gaze. And, Selena said quieter, she has us. The word sat in the room. Us. She'd said it matter-of-factly, like it was already true, already established, already load-bearing, and it was, he realized. It had been for a while. Selena, he said carefully, if this gets complicated legally, publicly my situation becomes visible. Yuna's team will build a narrative. They'll look at my life, my circumstances, anyone in it. He held her gaze. I need you to know that. Before you, Namjoon. She cut him off gently but completely. Do you think Victor Hale's lawyers were polite? He blinked. I have sat across from people far more motivated than a custody attorney, she said evenly. I am not afraid of being looked at. A pause, something shifting in her expression deeper, more personal. And I am not leaving because things got complicated. That is not what I do. Not with things that matter. He looked at her. You matter, she said simply. Mia matters. She held his gaze with the full, direct, undeflected certainty of a woman who had made a decision. We're not negotiable. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. His voice was slightly rough around the edge of it. Okay, she said. The custody case moved through the legal system with the grinding patience of institutions that don't care about the human urgency of the thing they're processing. Namjoon's lawyer was extraordinary. Selena's recommendation proven correct at every turn. Precise and methodical and fierce in the specific way of someone who had chosen this work because they believed in it. Yuna's petition was manageable. Not easy, nothing about it was easy but manageable. There were difficult days. Days when Namjoon came to work with the specific quiet of someone who had been up at 2 a.m. with his thoughts, and won by sheer stubbornness. Days when the legal correspondence landed wrong, and he had to sit in the stairwell for 10 minutes before he could be in the same room as other people. On those days, Selena appeared, not always with words, sometimes just there, food on his desk when he came back from the stairwell, a hand on his shoulder as she passed on the way out of a meeting, brief and certain. A text at 11 p.m., she's okay. You're okay. Sleep. He saved every one of those texts. And on her difficult days, because she had them too, the aftershocks of Victor's attempted incursion still working through the business, new security protocols to implement, relationships to rebuild with partners who become nervous, he showed up. He cooked. He sat with her. He asked questions and listened to the answers, and didn't try to fix the things that didn't need fixing, just held the space while she worked through them. They learned each other's difficult days, the specific signatures of them, the particular kind of quiet that meant I need company versus I need space, the things that helped and the things that didn't. They were learning each other. Properly, at the speed that real things are built. The night the custody agreement was finalized, Namjoon sat in his lawyer's office and signed a document that gave Mia a stable, legal, defined future. Not the future he dreamed when he was young and optimistic and in love with the wrong person. A different one. A real one. Partial visitation for Yuna, structured, supervised initially, built on demonstrated commitment rather than biological claim. Mia's primary home with Namjoon, clear and protected. He shook his lawyer's hand, walked out into the February evening, stood on the sidewalk. He called Selena. It's done, he said, a breath on her end. How do you feel? He thought about it honestly. Like I can look at next year, he said, for the first time in a while. Like next year is actually mine. Ours, she said quietly, correcting him. The way she said us now naturally, without ceremony, like it was just true. Ours, he agreed. Come over, she said. I'll cook. He stopped walking. You'll cook, he repeated. I cook, she said with dignity. Selena, the one time you tried to make rice. That was a different situation. The smoke alarm. Come over or don't, she said. I'm making something. He was smiling, so wide it was inconvenient. I'm coming over. I'm also stopping for groceries. I have groceries. I'm stopping anyway. Namjoon. See you in 40 minutes, he said, and ended the call. He brought Mia. Mrs. O had offered, but Mia had heard the word Lena, and the situation was simply out of everyone's hands after that. Selena opened her apartment door, the private space she'd started letting him into gradually, carefully, a room at a time, and looked at the two of them on her doorstep. Namjoon with groceries, Mia with Bok, in her coat and her small red boots, already reaching her arms up towards Selena before the door was fully open. Selena picked her up, not awkwardly anymore. Naturally, adjusting Mia onto her hip with the ease of someone who had been doing it long enough for the body to learn it. Mia patted her cheek. Lena cook, she announced, with a pride in this that suggested she was taking personal credit. Lena is trying to cook, Namjoon said, stepping inside. Lena is cooking, Selena corrected, turning into the apartment. You are supervising. I'm bringing quality ingredients. You don't trust me. She made a face. I trust you completely, he said, setting the bags on her kitchen counter. With my company, with my heart, with my daughter. I'm slightly more cautious about the stove. She turned to look at him. He looked back. Mia looked between them. Then Selena put Mia down, turned to the counter, picked up a knife, and began cutting vegetables with the precise, unhurried competence of someone who absolutely knew what they were doing. Namjoon watched. She was good. The knife work was clean, the movement sure. She hadn't been lying. She could cook. She just rarely did it for anyone. He leaned against the counter beside her. You've been practicing, he said. I have not been practicing, she said. Chapter 4, he said quietly. The coconut and ginger. There was a pause in the chopping. I made it once, she said, to see if the recipe was accurate. And, she glanced at him. It was excellent. He looked at her profile, at the clean lines of her face, the focused attention she gave the cutting board, at the woman who had bought a waffle maker and researched toddler sleep, and made his grandmother's recipe alone in her kitchen to see if it was accurate. I love you, he said, quietly, just because it was true. She didn't stop chopping, but the corner of her mouth moved. I know, she said. Selena, I love you too, she said, matter-of-factly, like the sky is blue, like it has always been exactly this true. Now hand me the garlic. He handed her the garlic. Mia, who had settled on the kitchen floor with Bok and a wooden spoon she'd found and was conducting some personal experiment with both, looked up at them briefly, assessed the situation, returned to her experiment. Everything was exactly as it should be. Dinner was good. Actually good. She'd made a coconut and tomato braised chicken that tasted like something you'd order in a restaurant, and he'd made rice and a simple salad, and between them the table was full and the apartment was warm, and Mia ate approximately 4 bites of chicken, and then had strong opinions about the bread and fell asleep in Selena's arms between the main course and whatever came after. Selena sat very still when it happened, Mia's head heavy on her shoulder, the boneless weight of a sleeping toddler, Bok still clutched in one small hand. Namjoon watched her not move, watched her adjust slowly, carefully so Mia was more comfortable, one hand light on her back. She's out, he said softly. I know, Selena said, even lower. Her eyes were on Mia's face, that expression the wide-open one, the one she'd stopped managing in this apartment, in this kitchen, with these people. I can take her, he said. Not yet, Selena said. He looked at her. She looked up. Their eyes met over the sleeping child between them, and the look that passed was long and quiet and full of everything of all of it. Every kitchen evening, every almost moment, every brick in the wall that had come down slowly and without fanfare, every small thing that had accumulated into this. He reached across the table, covered her free hand with his. She turned her hand over, held his. They sat like that, Mia asleep between them, the apartment warm, the dinner cooling gently on the table, the city outside doing its vast and different beautiful thing. Thank you, she said softly. He wasn't sure for what exactly. For the food, maybe. For staying. For not rushing what was worth doing slowly. For all of it. Thank you, he said back. She looked at him. For what? She asked. For the car, he said. She blinked. Then she understood. The morning of the crash. The way she'd looked at Mia in the back seat and put her phone away. I almost didn't, she said. I know, he said. But you did. She held his gaze, and then she smiled the full one, the one she'd stopped containing, the one that changed her whole face and made her look like the girl who had loved math because it was always true, who had followed her mother around a warm kitchen, who had been so many things before the world decided cold was safer. All of it, present and alive and real. You crashed into my car, she said. I was distracted, he said. You were late. I was distracted and late, he conceded. But it worked out. She looked at him. It really did. Later, much later, Mia asleep in Selena's guest room that had quietly, over the past month, become Mia's room. The small evidence of her accumulating on the shelf. A spare box in the drawer because Namjoon had bought a backup after one near-catastrophic loss incident. They sat on the floor of Selena's living room. Not the couch. The floor. His back against the couch. Her back against his shoulder. Her legs stretched out. His hand resting easy on her knee. The city through the window, lit and enormous. The apartment is quiet. Tell me something, he said. The game they'd been playing for months now, the exchange that had built everything between them. She was quiet for a moment. I'm happy, she said. Simple. Just that. He felt it move through him, the word, the truth of it, the fact that she had said it out loud, offered it without qualification. Yeah, he said softly. Yes. I didn't think. She stopped. I had stopped expecting it. I thought this was what my life was. The company. The work. She gestured vaguely. I thought that was enough because I'd made it enough. And now, he said. She leaned her head back against his shoulder and looked at the ceiling. Now I know the difference, she said quietly. He pressed his lips to her temple. Soft and unhurried. She closed her eyes. Your turn, she said. He thought about it. I came to New York with nothing, he said. 2 years ago. A job that turned out to be the wrong one. A woman who turned out to be the wrong one. And a city that genuinely did not carry their way. He paused. And I kept going. Not because I was brave. Because Mia needed me to, and I didn't have any other option. That is brave, she said. It's love, he said. They feel different from the inside. She was quiet. What do you have now? She asked softly. He looked around the apartment. At the city in the window. Down the hall where Mia was sleeping in the room that had become hers. At the woman leaning against him. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slow. Everything, he said. Simply and completely. I have everything. The last morning of February came in cold and clear, the light sharp and honest the way late winter light is, the city bare and beautiful in it. Namjoon arrived at Ellison Tech at 8:34 a.m. Not early, not late. Right on time. He crossed the lobby, took the elevator to 12, set his things at his desk, said good morning to Peter, opened his laptop. At 9 a.m., Selena's assistant called down with a message. Miss Ellison would like you in her office at 10. Bring the Q1 infrastructure report. He looked at the message. Tell her I'll be there, he said. He went back to work. At 9:58, he took the elevator to 15, the report under his arm. Walked the long hallway. Knocked twice. Come in. She was at her desk. She looked up when he entered, and her expression did the thing it did when it was just them relaxed at the edges, present in a way that was different from her professional present. He closed the door, crossed the room, set the report on her desk. She looked at it, then at him. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she said. Her voice was warm underneath the even register. It always was now. He looked at her. Nice view, he said, nodding at the window. She glanced at it. The city, all of it, the buildings and the bridges and the enormous complicated living thing of it. It is, she agreed. She was looking at the city, but he was looking at her. He had been looking at her for months. He intended to keep looking for a very long time. She turned back, found him watching, held it the way she held his gaze now, without looking away, without reaching for the distance. The report can wait 10 minutes, she said. Can it? He said. I think so, she said. He came around the desk. She turned her chair toward him. He crouched down to her level, hands on the armrests, bringing them eye to eye, the city enormous behind her through the glass. 10 minutes, he said softly. 10 minutes, she confirmed. He kissed her, not quickly but properly. The way you kiss someone when you're not in a hurry, when you know where you're going, when the destination is already decided, and the only thing left is the beautiful, slow fact of getting there. She kissed him back, and outside the window the city moved, all of it, the taxis and the construction, and the 8 million people in their small, warm boxes, none of them caring, all of them building, all of them trying, and in here there was this. Just this. A man who had come to New York with nothing, and a woman who had built everything from the ground up, and a love neither of them had planned for. The most honest kind. The kind that tells the truth about you. She had spent 32 years building walls strong enough to keep the whole world out. She hadn't planned for someone who would simply sit down beside them and wait. She hadn't planned for a little girl who said her name like it had always been hers. She hadn't planned for any of it. It turned out those were the very best plans of all. Two people who had built walls around their hearts. Slowly together, they broke down those tough bricks and found a way to each other. Enjoy stories like these? Don't forget to subscribe for more besties. Love you, Jub Jub.